Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, welcome. I hope that everything is working wonderfully fine, especially the audio. That's always a tricky question. I think we can. My dear guest, Pyotr Kurzin from the Global Gambit, it's an honor to have you here tonight. Would you mind introducing yourself so that both the audience get to know you and we can check some audio?
Well, Elliot, absolutely. Hopefully you can hear my delightfully British accent coming through. I think that's going to throw some people off immediately because we've got a Brit who's talking about the EU and is actually sort of part of the EU, right? Not some isolated little England scenario. Sorry, that's a quib joke, guys. You can probably tell where I sit on certain things. But yeah, my name is Pyotr. I host my own channel called the Global Gambit, or Pyotr Kurzin Geopolitics, and I don't know. I've had Elliot on. We had a lovely conversation. Maybe Elliot, you can link to that in the description below after our conversation. And I've wanted to work with these guys for a while. I come from a background of sort of international relations, economics, studied at Johns Hopkins in the US, and have since worked in the UN, World Bank, Crisis Group, if any of those names mean anything. And now I work as a sort of consultant, communications, and run the channel as well. So very much on top of everything, very passionate about Europe, given all the broad things that are happening around the world, and think that we should be able to find a collective and strong way forward. And I think that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, isn't it, Elliot?
Yeah, I believe so. And I'm also quite sure that Brexit is going to make a little appearance, maybe in a small form somewhere tonight. So for everyone that's watching, exactly like we just said, security, defense, geopolitics, those are going to be the big topics of tonight. And we kind of want to explore a little bit about all the big things our EU politicians have been saying the past, I want to say, year or two, where we've heard great speeches, we've read many articles, but now we really want to start looking into, okay, what does European defense look like, especially with developments in the United States as well. So I think to kick it off, and there's many topics that we're going to be covering tonight, but to kick it off, let's talk a little bit about Ukraine to get it out of the way, because that is obviously one of the main ones. And I think everyone is expecting it. So let's talk about Ukraine. So the first thing that we spoke about on your channel, and I will include the link in the description, was how United States presidency is going to impact the war in Ukraine, and then especially what role is the European Union going to play in that. So let's start with that. What role will the European Union have to play when it comes to this new presidency? Is it going to be more, let's say, positive in the sense that we're going to have closer cooperation, or is it going to be more EU has to stand on its own?
I think it's the fundamental question, to be honest, Elliot, because Trump is the overarching, I think, factor in every single geopolitical element that America has some degree of influence. If we're talking about a minor conflict in Southeast Asia, then maybe not, right? I don't think Trump being in office is necessarily going to do anything for the Myanmar civil war, for example. But when it comes to NATO and the EU, I think that that's also another factor, which is the complex and convoluted relationship of the EU to NATO. We've also got the OSCE. We've got subdivisions in the EU, like the Three Seas Initiative. We were talking about it before we came on air, but the Weimar Triangle, right, which we can unpack later, maybe. All these subdivisions and sort of collective security alliances or pacts are very complicated. Obviously, the EU is the overarching entity by which at least continental Europe looks at itself in terms of security and defense. But Trump is fundamentally going to change the relationship. Now, I use that word change because I had an interview with a gentleman called Jason J. Smart on my channel a few days ago, and we were in agreement, surprisingly, that, and I would love your take on this as well, which is, it seems to me that Trump is sort of changing a little bit his rhetoric. Now, whether or not that comes through with action as well, but, when he met Zelensky and Macron, obviously trying to be the kingmaker or whatever, the deal broker between the two, as he always likes to be. Trump was wearing a navy blue suit. I shared a meme on my channel about, it was bright blue and yellow tie. Okay, I had enhanced the photography, so it looked more like it was pro-Ukraine. It was a dark navy blue suit, but he had a yellow tie. And maybe I'm reading too much into that, and some people are saying you are. But he has been more willing to listen to Zelensky and also some of the people he's put in office or in the upcoming office, right? Marco Rubio, whatever you think about his domestic politics, he's not as bad as some of the other options could be. Equally, General Kellogg, heavily pro-Ukraine, or at least continuing to support Ukraine in some way. So my opinion has evolved since reading an article in Politico in the summer where it said, the worst case scenarios for the European Union and NATO could be Trump pulling out or completely defunding. So that doesn't stop, though, the fact that the EU needs to step up. I'm firmly behind that. I think we are going to see an acceleration in that. But to bring it back round to the original point, which is that there's been a running theme for many years, orchestrated and pushed most of all by Macron, which is the idea of a European army and a strategic autonomy. I think Europe needs to be strategically autonomous, absolutely. And whether or not that means there's a physical standing army or we just have greater, control over what way we take our foreign policy, vis-a-vis transatlanticism or towards engaging with China and other actors that we can work together with in sort of constructive ways, I don't know. But I think Trump will be the kick in the arse that I think Europe has needed for a while. That includes the UK. The UK will have some kind of security relationship with the EU. It's going to be interesting to see how that happens. But that's what I would say. I think we're definitely going to see changes, but I just hope that it goes in the direction that we need it to, right?
Yeah, so there's there's quite a lot to respond to there. But I'm gonna address the chat real quick, and people feel free to give your own takes, your own opinions. We would like to hear everything as well. Discuss them. If you have any questions, we would love to cover those as well.
Where is the chat? I can't see the chat. I want to see what.
I don't think the chat is on here. You can go to the link I sent you of the YouTube, and you can.
I can go onto the YouTube channel. Okay, I'll have a look down there. All right.
So already we had a comment saying that starting off with a small topic like Ukraine is very nice. So yeah, I think in general I would agree with you that this could be the kick in the arse for the European Union to finally get things off the ground. And I want to get a bit more into specifics on that in a little bit, because I don't know if you follow European politics as such that much, but we just had our commission elected a few weeks ago, so the European Commission, and within that European Commission, there's a new commission called the European Commission for Defense Industry and Space. So this is a new one that's completely focused on getting this idea off the ground of European defense and especially the European defense industry. But it comes out with a budget of 8 billion euros, and that's for 6 years. And I just did a quick Google search. The amount of money for 1 year in R&D in the United States for the military is 122 billion. So it's 8 billion, or let's say 1 billion per year for the European Union, and 122 billion for the United States for our research and development only. So we have this new great commission, but it doesn't have any money. So I think we should start looking into the ideas, sure, but how do we make them a bit more concrete? So I was let's take one topic one by one, and I know it's very interesting.
Can I add one quick premise to your point, which is that there was a startling graphics in The Economist a few months back, but it shows you that the US economy continues to grow. Right, I'm really glad you mentioned economic growth here, because the European Union as a whole has been pretty stagnant. Right, growth is about 1 to 1.5%, whilst the US is 3 to 4%. And if you want to radically or significantly re-alter your economic output and industries to remilitarize or just upscale military production, right? I'm not saying Europe's going to go to war with Russia immediately, but the point is we are seeing Poland, for example, obviously 4%, 4.5% of their budget goes towards their military. And the European economies just are not growing like that. And we've still got a remnants of austerity. COVID is still around. So Europe faces a really challenging situation where we need to see more deviation of funds, allocation of funding. and energy and focus. And one of the people in the chat just said, "Does Europe really have a foreign policy?" Not really effectively as clear cut as it could. So sorry,
before we get into that, no, I think this economy point is a bit. It's very interesting to dive into a little bit more, because one of the main things of this new strategy that they're presenting, it's called the European Defence Fund, and part of that is the European Defence Industrial Strategy. It's many different acronyms and there are many different names, but basically it comes down to this: they have like 3 very clear indicators that they want to achieve, and which is one of them is 40% of defensive procurement it will have to be done in collaboration with other EU member states by 2030. So 40% has to be bought together of weaponry. Then we have 35% of the, okay, that's irrelevant, let's say. But the final one, and I think it comes most back to your point, which is 50% of defense procurement budget within the EU. So 50% of defense budgets within member states have to be spent inside of the European Union by 2030. So that really speaks to me to rather heavy protectionist measures. And I wanted to get your opinion on that idea of only spending European, or at least 50% by 2030, but it has to be increasing over the coming years. So is that a good thing? Wouldn't we have to buy weapons from the United States, for example, or South Korea, where we see Poland buy many of their weapons? Or is it really necessary that the European Union has to get their own industry off the ground? I'm going to leave that as an open question first.
No, I think it's a good point. Yeah. The EU is difficult because it's a supranational organization. It's not a singular entity. Yeah. And someone's made the allusion to the obviously infamous Hungary and Viktor Orban, and what that means for the ability for things to get through, right? Yeah. I think it's a combination. I'm not I certainly appreciate protectionism in terms of why certain nation states or heads of state want to do it. And in some ways, I almost think it might be a necessity to protect certain industries. I'm not a globalist, despite what people tried to make me out on Twitter. I'm an internationalist predominantly, right? I believe in international cooperation, but I understand domestic industries are important to protect for whatever certain reasons, right? The British were having the issues with the farming, the same in the Netherlands, right? Yep. There is a lot of pushback against that. And I do empathize with those who are on the receiving end of that. But at the same time, but the point I'm making is that we need domestic industry to be developed. Yeah. We need to invest or refocus on manufacturing industries. For London, right, the UK is screwed. We are so bad in terms of economic inequality between the north and the south, and our overemphasis on service industries. So focusing not purely just on military, but for military means, but all the extensions that come as part of military build-up, technological advancement, manufacturing hubs, that certainly benefits the European Union aggregately. But at the same time, we need to continue. Of course, we need to trade with the Americans and the South Koreans and our allies and partners. Of course we do. But it needs to be more on our terms, right? At the moment, the EU is very much a client state or a collective client entity to the United States, right? I'm going to use the typical quote, but the EU needs to stop being, relying on Russia for cheap oil and gas, China for big markets, and America for security assurances. Of course, we need to work closely with the US. But if Trump is going to literally tariff 20 to 25% of any nation state just because he feels like it, well, I'm looking forward to seeing how Brussels responds with the retaliatory measures that they've been setting up, apparently. So I think Europe needs to be more bullish. I think Europe as a continent needs to be more hawkish. And whilst more Europeans are happy with, we aren't earning as much, but we're happier with our overall lifestyle. Yeah, I get that. I don't want to live to work. I'm much more European minded than American. But at the same time, I do think we need more push like that. So I think it's a combination of the two, in my opinion. But what do you think?
Do you think I mean, I think we won't disagree very much on being internationally focused. I mean, seeing as we were talking about geopolitics, it kind of comes with the profession, right? But when it comes to European defense, I feel like it's a pretty good development where we're saying, okay, guys, we're no longer going to be relying on outside procurement. We're going to be building a European. And I feel like one of the biggest examples of why that's so important is when we're looking about is that 1.5 years ago now, where the European Union promised 1 million shells to Ukraine, and that came about a year late, let's say. I feel like just that's a perfect example of, we say big things and we can't really deliver on them when it comes to industry. Although that capacity is being built up incredibly right now, we didn't have that when we needed it the most. So building some like domestic, I'm saying European Union military manufacturing, I think that's a pretty good thing.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I just I'll put it this way. So one of the main arguments that pro-Kremlinites have used, i.e. people who are more sympathetic to Russia's position in the war in Ukraine, is that this has all been some kind of long-term ambition of the United States, right? Hear me out on this, but the idea is that if they can utilize Europe as a basis by which to take down one of their primary adversaries in a grand strategic sense, right?
Yep.
Their main adversary is China, but Russia is still there, and Putin is trying to make Russia be relevant, and he's kicking his toys out the pram, sort of, look at me, I'm still here, I'm still relevant. Russia's I am half Russian, guys, so I can say that. I'm not saying I know everything, but like I know how he thinks, I think, and basically America wants to sort of get rid of Russia, and if they can exploit, but leverage that, right? Because think about it from the energy perspective. If they can cut off gas to Eastern Europe and the rest of Europe, where does Europe go for energy? America, right? And they're selling as LNG at height rates. So my father has said, or other people have said, my father's not pro the Kremlin, but he said, I'm skeptical of really the sort of altruistic way that the Americans have been doing this, right? They want to remain, ensure that the European Union is still reliant on America for both energy security and military assurance, right? So I think it's an interesting argument. And why I'm sharing all this is because I just think it is in the interests of the Europeans to be much more autonomous. We need to push for that. And that's why, whatever you think of Macron, I do appreciate. I'm picking my words carefully here because he is screwing
very
up
diplomatically.
But I appreciate what he's trying to do, which is get European policymakers and leaders to wake up and realize that Europe needs to be, like China said, the third pole, right? You've got China, you've got America, we've got the EU, right? We need to be more independent. So anyway, and that's where Germany's election is going to be very important coming up in February.
Absolutely. I mean, one final thing on that idea of the European Union as a vassal state, almost. We have someone else mentioned it as well. User Boomerage32 said, Putin once said, I do not negotiate with vassal states, in reference to Europe. Piotr is right. Europe needs to stop relying on America, or we will forever remain subordinate. And I feel like the counter argument to our, let's say, Russian friend would be, okay, how would I put this? Let's say, I think America has a very good stake in having a strong European Union as well, having a strong European Union ally in that sense. Because, like you said, China is pretty much the focus, has been since, I want to say 10 years now, a bit longer, started with Obama. And having a strong European Union that can also back up the United States when it has to. I mean, we're still in NATO, so we're talking kind of as we're already separate, but we're still very much linked together. Helps the United States. If the European Union is going to hold their own in Europe, the United States can move to Asia, for example.
If I can add one last point, which is though that people are also alluding it in the chat, which is that we've got a very big jumbled jigsaw, right? It's a patchwork. That's the word I'm looking for. It's a patchwork of different nation states with different priorities, different strategic and self-interests, right? So on the one hand, we've got Poland, staunchly opposed to Russia, staunchly pro more military autonomy and militarization, right? But just down the road, we've got Hungary, which is largely the opposite in terms of their vision of their relationship with Russia. So and then we've got countries that are not part of NATO and sort of have their own unique European relationships. Someone's mentioned Ireland. You've also obviously got Norway and its unique model in NATO, and obviously with the EU as well. So this also makes it harder because you've got all these different voices. But I do think there are some areas that maybe the European Union needs to take more of a staunch, no nonsense approach, right? Which is that when Hungary was willing to obstruct a couple of policies, last year, I think it was, the European Union, Brussels basically said, okay, well, we're going to withhold, several $1 billion worth of funding, or euros, sorry, to you, which they need. I don't necessarily like that because it does come off as slightly sort of overarching control. But at the same time, if the EU wants to move ahead as a collective entity and ensure its own protection and prosperity, maybe it's something that we have to consider. I'm not saying decentralize more power in Brussels, but I don't know. It's a really tough one, to be honest.
It is I think it's a balancing game here, because you don't really have a different choice as the European Union as to that is the only stick that you kind of have within the European Union, is withholding money. That's the only stick that the European Union has, unless we start moving to something that's qualified majority voting, and we've spoken about it at length on our channel, which is for those that don't know, removing the veto vote within the European Union on things like foreign policy, and making it so that you need a qualified majority of countries and population, depending on what flavor you're going to pick, to make the decisions. And as long as we don't have that, then it's going to be rather difficult. You just mentioned one thing that was also very interesting, but I forgot now. Anyways,
what about about what, like
Hungary?
what, freezing them out, basically?
Suspend
withholding funds.
Yeah, and centralizing power in Brussels. That was the point as well. Yeah, okay. Now I remember. Yeah, centralizing. So I think, and this is a personal opinion, and everyone might disagree with that. That's fine. That you should take these more like larger scale competencies like foreign policy and partly defense, and take that to Brussels. But at the same time, you can take competencies back from Brussels and send them back to the member states as well, right? Like you can make them. It's like pick and choose almost, where if you want to really be at full control, and member states are of your education systems. Take it, fine, sure. The European Union doesn't have anything to say about that. But when we're talking about big, large-scale relations between countries, between the United States, between China, then we kind of need a little bit of I don't want to say wiggle room, but more of a fist that you can speak with. Because, like you said, if we're all like pointing the same way, but Hungary or any other state for that matter says, well, I don't really feel like it, then we're not really going to go anywhere. But
no, I agree. Yeah. I think it depends on the type of policy. Ironically, we were having this conversation on a stream I did yesterday with another great channel on IR, and he talks a lot about statehood and self-determination, and it's an area that I'm very interested in, because how does a country become a country, right? So you may have seen that Trump is potentially going to recognize Somaliland, of all countries, right? Somaliland is a quasi-state in Somalia, in the Horn of Africa. And, that would be obviously setting a controversial precedence. But the point is that sort of this comes back to the broader idea of the European Union. How integrated do we want it to be? Yeah. Do we want it to be a federalized Europe, a United States of Europe largely, or do we want it to be looser? Because that's what led to the European sovereign debt crisis of the 2011-2012, right? Because you've got countries which have independent fiscal policy, but a centralized bank, which is dealing the money supply and interest rates across the whole country. And so you've got Germany, which needs interest rates to go up, but Greece that needs them to go down, like completely opposite. And it creates a complete and utter destruction for the whole EU. So as part of any evolution of European defense, we need to get the European economic framework more under wraps, and whether or not we want centralization or autonomy in that, or fluidity, or you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, well, you're not going to find much disagreement with me, at least there. So I'm going to turn to the chat to see if there's any dissenting voices in that sense. Let's see. Nakumara RTS says, how many decades of stagnation must we endure before we move away from small nation states? The model doesn't work. An economy of scale requires significant integration. So that kind of even harder than what you just said. But it kind of comes down again to the point of leveraging size against these, frankly, behemoths that is the United States and China, right? But I feel like we're almost moving a little bit away from the topic. European integration is endlessly interesting for me, and I believe many viewers as well. But I kind of want to come back a little bit more to the defense part of things. And you already mentioned the German elections. So let's think about those, because in recent news, and it has personally frustrated me a little bit, is Scholz and his somehow rigid stance of against sending the Taurus long-range missiles to Ukraine. And recently there was an article, I don't know how confirmed it is yet, but that even the SPD, Scholz's party in Germany, would include not sending the Taurus missile to Ukraine in their policy program, as this is not going to happen. Whilst on the other side, the leading candidate for the CDU, which is the at least currently polling the largest party in Germany, Friedrich Merz, he's actually quite a bit more open to the idea, especially because he's like in interviews and his visits to Ukraine has said, we don't want Ukraine fighting with one hand tied behind their backs. You should be able to strike any military target within Russia that you want. And he was already speaking out, or at least openly thinking about sending those Taurus missiles. So I guess my question would be, what is your first impression here? What can these elections in Germany do for the broader European security and Ukraine as well?
My first impression is that anything better because Scholz will be gone. Sorry to be blunt, but he is absolutely useless. I always give the benefit of a doubt to an initial leader, give them a chance to, have a mandate. Let's see what they can do. But he has been such a fence sitter, such an unwillingness to, in sort of strategical studies and theory, you have different types of support, right? And
Yep.
Germany has primarily been in terms of defensive support, right? They provide Ukraine with defensive equipment, not necessarily ones that can make offensive capabilities. And well, it's the odd generic example, Elliot, but when, we'll give you 50,000 helmets. Great. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Short. So I'm very hopeful that he will be gone. I don't hate him personally, but as I say, it's just I like Macron for one particular reason, which is at least he's willing to take risks in his foreign policy, to put himself out there and suggest crazy ideas. Scholz is so unwilling to take any, he doesn't want to put a foot wrong, but by exactly trying to do that, it's worked completely against him. And well, he's made it looks terrible. So yeah, I think the election is not ideal in terms of overall European stability, but the trade-off in terms of lack of movement from the German side, the German government in the short term, will be better off because we'll see someone who's more willing to actually okay, I'm going to commit to this policy. It might not be the most popular, it might have repercussions, but at least he's got conviction. So I think, what's the CDU are running at about 33% in the polls at the moment.
Yeah, well,
so they'd have to, I don't know who they would be sharing a government with, but I also have my reservations about striking deeper into Russia with sort of storm shadows and such military. But at the same time, the red lines that the Kremlin has constantly said have not been followed through. We cover that almost all the time on my channel. So, people who watch me will know where I sit on that, or the guests that I interview about that. So I think the election is incredibly important, and it could be along with it's like a double whammy effect, right? We've got a change in the French government. We've got an introduction of Trump, and we've got a new head of German state, right? So 3 big changes, which could really accelerate the evolution of European defense, hopefully in a more positive direction, where we see the Franco-German axis becoming more unified again, more stable. And then with the Weimar Triangle, which we mentioned with Poland, you could hopefully see a core entity emerging there, and maybe with the French trying to engage the Brits to join on some looser setting as well. Then we could have a good sort of collective continental approach to our defense going forward as well. But, again, this is all very abstract. So what do you
if only they put us in charge of all these countries, we could make it so beautiful. No, I wanted to come to the defense of Germany a little bit, okay? Because I heard the quote with the helmets a billion times as well. But I mean, when it comes to actually sending military aid, they have been one, if not or I think the biggest in the EU, even above the UK when it comes to military aid and humanitarian aid. So, even though this is the schizophrenic thing about it, when you have Germany saying like, well, I don't know, do we really want to send this equipment? Do we really want to do this? Here, have some helmets. That's what we see. But at the same time, they're sending quite a lot of military support to Ukraine. Compare that with France, who is on the opposite, who says, we have to do more, we have to do this, we have to do this. It's a lot more, let's say, what's the word here? Confident in their foreign policy approach, and a lot more assertive when it comes to Macron. But when it comes to the numbers, like half or less than Germany, way less, I think, than Germany. So it's. I really like if only Germany did both. That is what I'm saying. So let have Scholz some imagination. Let him be a bit more expressive in his support. And then also send support, also send the actual support itself. But that will not happen probably, especially with these talks.
No, I think it's a really good point. If you look at any funding that has been to Ukraine over the almost 3 years now, the Germans have been behind the EU or the US. Germany has been the highest provider. Yeah. What I think is important to distinguish is obviously in what format. The Americans have sent primarily military funding, or military things, which benefits American domestic industry. The EU has been the highest financial supporter. And then I think Germany I think it's a mixture, but it's also been quite a big humanitarian aid provider.
Sure, I got the numbers here if you want.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
11 billion euros in military aid, 3.2 billion in humanitarian aid, and 1.4 billion in financial aid. So definitely the military is the largest chunk, at least according to the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. So I hope they know what they're talking about.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, no, for sure. No, okay, yeah. So Germany has done a lot, but sort of France says a lot, but they don't necessarily follow through in every way, and they always have their unique relationship with NATO anyway. So maybe the French want to put more into I don't know. Do you think that they could put more into the EU like that? Try to sort of put it
right
instead of NATO? I don't know if that makes sense.
No. I think I get what you mean. I would say yes, but I don't think Macron's country is really following him in that sense anymore. I mean, I speak to my French colleagues here, where sometimes they're like, very angry at what Macron has done again inside of their country, and then I'm like, but I kind of like Macron internationally, and they're like, he's a totally different beast internationally compared to domestically, and why I say this is that even though Macron might want to steer one way or the other, I feel like he's just gonna lose the support of French people anyways. But we were talking about Germany, so let me refocus a little bit, because I see many people in the chat as well talking about it, and that is the big one, the big let's say wild card, which is the AFD, together a little bit maybe with the BSW. So throughout recent I want to say months, we've saw polling get it quite wrong when it comes to right-wing parties. And now kind of the question is, if the AFD is going to do rather great, then Ukraine aid might start looking a lot more different than when we're comparing the SPD and the CDU, right? What is your take on the AFD and their stance on Ukraine, and maybe even further European integration?
Well, I mean, look, I think it's difficult, but we could sit here as internationalists or people who support certain, but I'm a centrist, right? I'm pretty central on most matters. I deviate to left or right depending on certain issues, not to an extreme sense, but I'm what you call a radical centrist, I think. People just like being labeled, so I try to label myself to save the trouble. But yeah, basically. But it's hard to dismiss that the AFD have support. And I don't think simply labeling everybody who supports the AFD as neo-Nazis or fascists or right-wing lunatics is going to help. That's what led to Brexit, and that's what led to Trump term 1.0. So we have to be careful in that regard. I mean, we can say the same in Britain. We have reform, right?
Yep.
Nigel Farage. If we had a different voting system, i.e. not first past the post or FPTP, they would have won 95, 100 seats. They
Yep.
got more than 4 million votes, right? But because of the way the thing was structured, Labour came through with a landslide. But that's not because people liked Labour. It was because they were tired of the Conservatives. So the point is that the AfD might not necessarily be a government that you want, a party that you want in government, but there is a significant proportion of the population that supports them, maybe because they just want to express their anger, discontent, and the desire for change, right? Trump is he's disturbing change, but he's changed nonetheless. And Kamala offered no tangible alternatives to the pre-existing establishment model. So I find it unlikely, that being said, that the CDU would get into bed with the AfD. I just don't think they're going to be willing to make that risk to their reputational risk to them, alienate some of their more traditional voter base who hate the AfD or don't like the AfD, but are still more right-leaning on many issues or something, say security. So I think you'll more likely see a conventional coalition, with the centrist parties. As to exactly who, I'm not entirely sure what what's the Greens are. And the Greens in Germany are not the Greens in the UK. So there is a desire for continued commitment to climate efforts across the continent. So maybe I think you would see a coalition of a couple of other parties. I'm not going to pretend who exactly.
No.
It depends also what the final polling results. They may be polling at 32%, but they could come through and get more. So they might only need to collab with the FDP, for example, or the FDP would do better than projections. So I don't think, bottom line, that they would do anything with the AfD. But what do you think?
So, first of all, let me completely underscore the point that you made, is that even though, you might disagree with or completely with the party, there is a certain sense of why people vote for these parties. Right? Like the support doesn't come from nowhere. So apparently there is a very large part in the population that is so upset with the current course that they're voting something completely the opposite, something completely radical, in the sense that we want to change the system in that sense. So it is absolutely useless to label them as all neo-Nazis, and obviously I completely agree with that. So I want to dismiss any notion of that is what we're saying. So yeah.
No, not at all. I want to be very clear on that. When I say that, it's just because that's part of the problem. When you've got people on one side of the spectrum who blanket label people on the other side, and it goes both ways, that only leads to deeper polarization and fragmentation within a political system and society. And the European Union, as when we first started talking, you and I, about collabing, it was after the European elections, right? And what did we see? We saw the centre held, to paraphrase von der Leyen, but we saw AfD doing very well in Germany, in France, but also the far left doing very well in the Nordic states. So we need to stop categorizing people as extreme X, Y, and Z if we want to get closer to actually finding, collective way forwards, right? Yeah, I'm very passionate about that because I think it's something that we need to stop doing. But anyway,
no, so it is totally worth naming. So. I mean, there's some comments as well. I mean, Demon says, I think a lot of AfD supporters are just unhappy voters with the mainstream parties, which, we already maybe feeling it. So when it comes to us, and we're biased, obviously, because we see things. I'm going to speak for us, okay? So stop me whenever you disagree. But I think we see things from a bit more of an international, holistic perspective, where every action, every policy, every political party, we're going to try and position them within the wider world, or at least within the European Union, relations with the United States, stuff like that. And just the fact is, the vast majority of people don't do that at all. They don't care at all about what happens across the ocean, or what happens in Slovakia, of all places. I mean, what do I care about what happens in Slovakia? So when making decisions on voting, especially on far left or far right parties, it's about, I'm unhappy with what's going on here and now, and that's why I'm going to be voting. So to hell with what it means with NATO, to hell what it means with European Union. I am going to express my discontent. That's at least how I view it.
No, 100%. I think that people use it as a protest vote, and this can lead to huge manipulation or exploitation by external parties, right, to bring in the security defense element. Why does Russia breed on these sentiments, right? Putin helps to. Why is there such a link, I think, between populism and Russian sort of, pro-Russian narratives, right? Because people who are sort of anti the establishment realize that if they can get on the sort of the Russian bandwagon, they can prey into the minds of people who are just anti the establishment. And that often means aligning towards Russian misinformation, disinformation like that. So we often think about security and defense in that physical sense of like how many jets, tanks, and so on. But cybersecurity and disinformation are arguably the biggest undermining factor of European security and defense at the moment, right? Russia, I'm skeptical, is going to have the bandwidth to just invade. If you think of COD, in 2011, where they, I'm revealing my age here, but like Modern Warfare 3, not the one from this year or whatever, but back in 2011, when Russia just somehow lands across Paris, London, and half of Europe at once. It's like, that's not going to happen, guys. But what they can do is undermine our elections and what's happening in Romania, what's happened in Moldova, or what could happen in Georgia, right? All these things are illustrations of huge risks to European stability and security.
Yeah, not the best Call of Duty, but it comes close to MW2.
No, it wasn't the best. My favorite was Modern Warfare 2.
Yeah,
definitely.
Exactly.
Always COD.
But like this is where you come to concepts of building resilient societies that NATO I know really likes to talk about. Like it's not just about tanks and guns. It's about what does the population, how do you protect the population? How does the population protect themselves, right? So it's incredibly interesting. And I know we didn't really set a date for this or like a set time for this interview. So I can ask you two more questions, and then we can like kind of maybe round it off. I don't know how much time you have left.
I'm happy to go for as long as you people are enjoying it. So I'm happy to go for as long as you've got more questions or people want to stay interested. So
sure,
happy to chat.
Sure. Good. Okay. So on the topic of let's say resilience, then, and trying to refocus it a bit to security and defense for the European Union. What do you think is one of the best things or the biggest issues that European countries can do or member states should focus on when it comes to protecting their populations against this hybrid warfare or these hybrid threats?
So the strongest asset that the US has, for example, is its alliance. The reason why, for what we think about Russia and China and Iran and North Korea as the autocratic axis, they lack a single fundamental unity of shared ideas. Countries are driven by interests, not values, but at the same time, values do hold a place, and democracy illustrates that overarching sort of connection, rule of law, in a way that you just won't see the Russians and the Chinese come to support one another in the same way, right? So in Europe's case, that's even more fundamentally true, because we are a continent that has been at war for millennia, and finally through sort of collective protection of democracy and etc. Right? That's why I'm a huge fan of the EU in principle. It has been a huge factor in that. So long way of saying we need to ensure that we are on the same page as a continent in what we want to achieve and how. If we have disunity and grievances that cross different nations, then that is something that can be leveraged by adversarial parties. So trying to find a way to engage Hungary, trying to find a way to engage, or even Serbia, Slovakia, right? Any country that has shown illustrations or indications, that they are, more open to sort of Russian influence. And I'm not anti-Russian, I'm anti-Putin, but the EU has done this in the past, right? There was when Kosovo and Serbia were exchanging clashes. I think it was the end of 2023, right? The EU was quite quick to say, we don't appreciate, this is not good. But equally, they were fair in that they were critical of both sides, including Kosovo. Pristina was not helpful in the way that they, well, I don't know if they provoked the entire situation, but basically Pristina didn't help the situation. And I think the EU's ability to leverage soft power, i.e. diplomacy, which is one of the strongest assets it has, was very useful. I also think the EU needs to do a better job of engaging with countries in its near abroad. So now that Syria has stabilized, there's a lot of discussion about return migration of Syrian refugees, asylum seekers, and so on. And I think for any permanent or more long-term solution of that to be achieved, that needs to be done with, respective nations that will be affected, or the North African routes as well. We need to stop just sending money and assuming that other countries, and if the EU wants to be seen as a leader, we need to take that leadership by, engaging local countries, neighboring states in North Africa and etc. to participate in that, to be active stakeholders. So I think that the EU needs to really be better at engaging with itself internally, trying to iron out as many issues as there are, but also have a clearer idea of what your priorities are. We mentioned it at the beginning, but I think it's relevant here, which is EU integration is something that has never been fully defined, right? EU is just going to keep growing and growing. So what? The Russians are going to be in the EU at some point? I think we need to stop expansionism and iron out our issues as they stand, right? I'm a firm believer in sort of too fast and too far at some point. Okay. The EU got too big and too quickly grew. So I think from a security standpoint, we need to stop focusing on that and work on improving the EU as it stands, and then begin to talk about how we can bring in more countries in the future, right? Okay. And also, the other main thing I think would be economic investment, right? Just long-term, not necessarily just supply side economics, but we really do need to find a way to increase European productivity. It is bad. The lack of productivity and just sort of continental growth that we have. So those are a few things that I really think we need to prioritize.
Sure. And I like you started out with when it comes to IR theory, very realist statement. I mean, when it comes down to states are governed by interests, that is an interesting conversation to be had there. But I think I'm going to start with slightly, let's say, agreeing with the fact that the EU needs to act outside of its borders as well, and then try to take their leadership position. But that kind of comes down to the EU doesn't have a unified foreign policy, doesn't have one voice to speak with. So we come back to the conversation we already had. And the part that I might disagree with slightly, so we actually have something we don't agree on, is the part where let me play devil's advocate a little bit here, where in principle I agree with engaging with everyone and trying to talk with let's say difficult actors like Orban within the European Union, or Slovakia, or or very disenfranchised voters on the far left, far right. But at some point you need to be careful that you're not crossing the balance of being captured by, how do I put this diplomatically? Both sides can hold you very hostage. If you are part of the large center and you're going to be engaging with the extremes, they can make many concessions and demands out of you because, for whatever reason, they are important politically, economically, any number of reasons. But then they can make concessions out of the center that aren't necessarily part of the larger center. And I feel like that's the part where you need to be a bit careful when it comes to handling with the extreme, so to say.
No, I take your point. The horseshoe theory is very pertinent, right? The reason why there's that fantastic book, is it Two Faces or something, Two Sides of One Face, or whatever, amazing historical comparison of Hitler to Stalin, right? They're two opposite ends of the political ideology, political spectrum, but they were both extreme dictators who, killed some of their own population because they didn't fall into their interpretation of the world. So Yes, you absolutely need to be careful of the two fringes, shall we call it? But
Yeah.
that's where I think I would use Brexit as an example, actually, which is I really hated Brexit because the Remain campaign had all the information. We had all the data to prove that it was wrong for us to leave the European Union, but we were terrible or we were complacent and resting on our laurels. That simply
Yeah.
cold hard facts and data would be enough to send and provide a story, a message to telegraph to people that will emotionally charge them. And
Yeah.
the Leave campaign preyed on that. And what I'm saying is that the center, we have the ability to engage the left and the right. We need to improve the ways that we do it, right? We need to
Yeah.
fight fire with
Very
fire.
good.
We need to, I'm not saying prey on people's emotions or something, but like we need to stop being so corporate in the way that we govern sometimes in the center and be much
Just to add
more,
on to that,
go for it.
just because I like the point. It's been what I've been thinking about recently, and we recently had we were active at a conference called "The Center is the Answer." It was we were invited there to come and talk about anything kind of related to centrism and democracy. And the idea that I got there by speaking to people is that we kind of maybe have to make centrism, or at least let's say not the fringe, a bit more sexy or like more attractive, where the reason why populism does so well is that it speaks to people and it's easy and it's quick, and I haven't figured out the answer yet, because otherwise I probably would be some very successful politician somewhere, I don't know, but somehow, some way, we need to send the message better that you don't have to go to either end of the extremes to fix your problems. But yeah, continue or give your thoughts.
Well, no, that's it, right? What do we have? We have the information. We have the actual truth. So when idiots like Farage come along, and I'm not saying I get why he's appealing, but like we've got stuffy autocrats or people who are, they are very good at their jobs, but they are terrible communicators and being able to relate to for people who are passionate about their lives
Yeah.
and countries, but they're not necessarily academics or political junkies like you or I. So the point I'm making is that we just need to do a better job of playing these populist types at their own game. Because if we can nail down how to do it, we will wipe the floor with them because we've actually got the information about it. And that's why I use the term radical centrist, because I'm a centrist and I'm pretty moderate in a lot of my views, but I'm certainly not a conventional centrist in that I'm quite sort of moderate and I'm like, oh, that's bloody outrageous, or tell you shut up. I don't know. So yeah, I think that's a core thing that the European Union, in its sort of existing sense, the more establishment needs to do a better job at, and because that also plays into the security and defense, doesn't it? Collective human security and identity.
Okay. There is so much more that we could speak about, especially when it comes to identity, because that's a topic that I really like as well. Maybe worth discussing in the future. But for the sake of time, I feel like we're getting around to a nice 1 hour. So I really want to thank you, Pyotr, for joining us tonight and discussing all of these very difficult topics with us. We went from the UK, the United States, to Russia, to everything to do with Germany. And I thought it was excellent. And we always like to try and give our guests the final say, the final word, any hopeful message, any shout-outs that you wish to give. So if you have anything that you want to share with the audience now and afterwards, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Elliot. It's been an absolute pleasure. I know we had our interview on my channel, which I will probably link in the description below.
I'll put it in as well,
or in the chat for people who are interested in. But yeah, I think probably for me, I would just say that you probably get a lot of guests, and some of them might be like, "Well, I've got to wrap up now. I've got to go somewhere else." But like, I'm the kind of person, I could continue talking about this for a while, because it's I think it's really important, and I want Europe to be a successful continent, and for us to stop being taken the piss out of by people across the Atlantic who sort of think, oh, well, those Europeans are just useless. They're not doing anything. They're not going anywhere. So I think it's incredibly important. And, my channel is not just about the EU. It's about the the relationship of geopolitics across the globe and covering many different issues in real time. So if that's appealing to people, I want to start doing more in Africa, for example. I lived out there for a couple of years, so that's very passionate to me, and how that relates to the EU. And obviously Ukraine is something we cover a lot. So yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope that we can do this again next year, at the start of next year, and take it from there. But thank you so much again, everyone, and look forward to seeing you.
Yeah, great. And once again, thank you guys. If you like geopolitics, please make sure to check out the Global Gambit. I certainly do. I'm watching, and it's great. So without further ado, thank you so much for watching, and have a lovely evening. Goodbye.